Spoiler alert, there's actually 4 bear stories.
Wow. This is Round Island. They started logging it back in the 90s.
Okay.
And they got about halfway and they found a bunch of bodies up in the trees and they had to stop.
So it's just a, wow.
Yeah, so they usually back in the day, you know, are...
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to Adventure in Art. My name is Ben Staley, your resident talking head. Let's get into this. It's been a strange year. I spent all fall, September, October, and into November, not every week, but off and on, visiting a bunch of camera stores around the country and telling stories and showing a bunch of my work for Lumix. And it was cool. I have never done anything like that before. Never had I, got up in front of people and shown my work in that manner. Of course, I've been making TV and films and stuff for well over a decade and had my stuff air on TV all over the world, but this was a little different. This is like live and in person, and I had to kind of decide, what am I going to talk about? And I guess I turned 50 this fall too, so it's like in the middle of that. And this whole process and this whole thing, it just really made me look back on my life in a way that I guess I just really hadn't before. I had a kind of a strange upbringing. Certainly unusual by modern standards, although where I come from, not that unusual. Still anomalous. It's not like out there. There's a lot of people who grew up like I did where I'm from, Alaska. Didn't have electricity till I went to college. Had an outhouse until I went to college. Trudging through the snow in the middle of December when it's, up to your thighs and you got to do your business in the middle of the night and it's 40 below. Brr. Anyways, I'm rambling. Let's get into this. So I was doing these talks and I was showing mostly some work from Africa. You've seen some of that on the channel here, and some other work from Alaska when I went up there and I did the G9II shoot, the kind of launch shoot. That was mainly the work I was sharing, but I would start off every presentation telling 3 stories about bears. And that's what I want to do here tonight. I'm gonna share those stories for you on the channel. I typically only had an hour to do these presentations, and so I would try and speed through this portion as quickly as possible and get to the work. But here, this is my channel and it's my time. And I guess if it gets long and boring, you can leave. Like that's your option. So I can maybe elaborate a little bit more here. I don't know if I'll do that. It's just, I don't know why I told these stories. It just occurred to me that that's how I should start it off. And I wanted to give people context for the work. And I wanted to let all these strangers know that this is who I am. This is how I grew up. And this is where I'm coming from. So, I got good feedback, and I got feedback of people that just wished I would have shown more pictures and talked about camera specs, and that's okay. Everybody is entitled to their own opinion. The first story I want to share with you is, it's not something that happened to me. It's a story my mother told me when I was a little kid. Actually, she probably told this story a bunch of times. My mom was a prolific storyteller. She loved to spin a yarn. And I probably learned how to tell stories from my mom. I mean, the truth is we didn't have a TV, so we're reading a lot of books. And actually, I like a lot of movies that are kind of big famous movies. I first heard about them and knew about them because of my mother telling me about the movies. Like, that's kind of weird. And sometimes she'd go to town and she'd stay at a friend's house and she'd see a movie and she'd come back and just tell me in exquisite detail about this movie she had seen. And I'm just a big lover of cinema. And I was a little kid because it was such a treat just to see a movie. It occurred to me to tell this story in this video. This week is the 4-year anniversary of my mom's passing. She passed right before COVID in early December of 2019. Kind of unexpectedly, kind of not so unexpectedly. I miss her. my mom had this fierce sense of adventure and mischief, and she just liked to go out and engage with the world, especially when she was younger. She liked to tell stories, and I miss her, but I feel like she's always here. And if I can tell these stories about her or tell some of her stories, it keeps her alive. I think she'd be pleased with it. My folks moved to Alaska in, I think, 1970. And it was pretty wild up there at the time. Much wilder than it is now. This is 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago. And it was, it's still a frontier state. The motto of the state is the last frontier. But back then, it was way wilder. And a lot of people, like today, but back then, the Vietnam War is still going on. The country's in turmoil. Things are changing rapidly. Technology's advancing. And a lot of people went up there at that time period to kind of escape modern day society. Maybe they're running from the law. They're running from the establishment. Maybe they're running from things inside themselves. There were always a good number of people around through my childhood that had like funny nicknames or assumed names. You just kind of knew that wasn't their real name, and maybe they didn't want people to know their real name for various reasons. It was a wild time. But when I was 4 years old, my parents split up. And my mom, I think about this now, my mom was, I think she was 25 years old maybe. She was only 20 when she had me, so she couldn't have been older than 25. And she moved up to Alaska. She just got married. She has me. She has another little boy, my brother David. And then boom, her marriage dissolves. And what is she going to do? What does she do? She freaks out. She gets on her horse and she rides 50 miles into the wilderness. 50 miles. Now, she's so remote anyways. Just keep in mind, there's no cell phones. There probably isn't even reception in this area today. It's so remote. There's no roads where she's going. There's maybe some dirt paths, like some old mining trails. She was very experienced with horses. She was a champion barrel racer as a teenager, and she was a horse lady. So she's very comfortable on her horse. But she gets on her horse. I don't even know if she had a tent. She probably had a tarp and a sleeping bag. She didn't even have a rifle. She had a fishing rod and a cooking pot. And she rides 50 miles up into the mountains to this place called Horse Pasture Pass. And it's like this big subalpine valley. It's really beautiful. And she camps out. And she's trying to figure out what she's going to do with her life, what she's going to do with this turmoil and her children, and where's she going to go? How is she going to survive? She's camped out there one evening. It's late in the day. Now it's summertime, so the sun stays up and it kind of just dips below the horizon for a few hours. But it's in the evening. She's sitting there. She's got her fire going. Her horse is staked out nearby. And she looks up, and there's this big old grizzly bear just ambling towards her. Now, she doesn't have a rifle. And she thinks, well, maybe she could get to her horse in time. Her horse is tied up. But she also knows that if she does make it to the horse before the grizzly gets her, a grizzly can outrun a horse for a pretty good distance. They can exceed speeds of 30 miles an hour. They're startlingly fast animals. This bear gets pretty close and it just sits down and starts looking at her. And my mom does the only thing she can think to do. She starts singing. And she sings all of her favorite songs. She sings James Taylor songs. She sings John Denver songs. She sings Carole King songs. Mostly, she sings Amazing Grace, and she sings it over and over, and the bear just sits there and keeps looking at her. Her fire burns down. She doesn't want to get up and get more wood. It doesn't matter. It's summertime. It's pretty warm. She keeps singing, and the bear just sits there and keeps looking at her. Finally, she's so exhausted she passes out. She wakes up sometime early in the morning, and the bear's gone. So she gets on her horse, packs up her camp, rides out of the mountains, gets on with her life. A year later, scratch that, 2 years later, life has moved on. My mother's remarried. I have a new little brother. And our little family decides to go into the mountains for the summer, back to this same area. The goal is to journey through the wilderness and end up in Horse Pasture Pass, the very same place. There's another family with us, no children, but a married couple and a couple other adults. We're all traveling on horseback and with a wagon. My family's got a little wagon. I'm actually riding one of the horses most of the time. And we would travel a few miles a day, or we'd travel a few miles, we'd find a campsite, and then maybe we'd stay there a few days and fish and hunt and hang out and have adventures. And so it takes us about a month to go 50 miles all the way to Horse Pasture Pass. We finally get up there, and it's like a little paradise. And if you're 6 years old, I was 6 years old when this happens. This was probably one of the more formative experiences of my life, and I've done some things. But this was like a grand adventure. I'm the oldest kid, and I'm 6 years old, and I've got all these adults who are down to have fun, down to play with me, explore with me. It was pretty magical. So we've got all these horses, and the horses, they have to be staked out so they don't run away, because horses will do that. You have to move the horses like twice a day. They have a hobble on an ankle, one of their legs. So you put this hobble on them, and then there's like a 40 or 50 foot rope that's staked into the ground. And so they can eat in this kind of diameter of the length of this rope. And so, but they have to be moved a couple times a day because they eat all the grass in that area. Luckily, we're in this big meadow, and it's hundreds of acres. It's massive. They're never going to eat all the grass. But as the summer progresses, you have to move them further and further away as they eat up all the grass. Well, it's like an afternoon, and all the adults are gone moving the horses. And I'm back at the teepee with just myself and my little brother David, who's probably 4. I think he's 4. And we were left alone a lot when I was a kid, and I'm the older brother, so I'm kind of in charge. And that's how my childhood was. So, did I mention we're living in a teepee? Yeah, we're all camping in teepees. So I'm hanging out in the teepee. David is just a short distance away. That's my brother David. He's a short distance away down by the creek, and he's washing his cowboy hat in the creek. Now I come out of the teepee, and I'm looking down the gentle rise of the terrain coming out of the teepee. I'm looking down, not a gentle rise, it sort of descends to where the creek is. And David is there, hunkered down with his back to me, washing his hat in the stream. And sitting on the bank across from him is a little bitty bear, a young bear, a cub. Now I know that a bear cub can be dangerous, especially when you're 4 years old, still bigger than David. But the most dangerous thing is the mother bear. David doesn't see the bear. He's so busy with his task of washing his cowboy hat. So I quickly but quietly walk quickly down to where David is at the creek, and I reach down and I take his hand, and as if he sort of senses it in that moment, and he kind of looks up. His concentration is broken, and he sees the bear, and his eyes get real big, and the bear's just sitting there looking at us. And I just take his hand, and we slowly start to back up the hill, back to where the teepee is. We get like halfway up the hill. The bear just kind of gets up and just very, very nonchalantly, very unbotheredly, just wanders off into the bushes and disappears. Never see it again. A few minutes later, 10 minutes later maybe, the adults come back. I say, wow, we saw a bear. They didn't believe me. Nah, it was probably a fox or a porcupine. I don't know, they mentioned a bunch of animals. I'm like, look, I'm 6, but I know what a bear is. About 3 or 4 years later, we're living in this cabin, and we're a couple miles off the highway. I have a new little brother now. Now I've got 3 little brothers. David, Andy, Jordan, the very youngest. He's so young that he's riding in a backpack on my mom's back. That's how he's getting around. He's less than a year old. It's springtime. Actually, he was born in the spring. So, when this happened, he's probably darn near an infant. Well, we lived off the highway, and in the winter there's a lot of snow, right? So we would, in the winter, the road is snowed over, we'd travel in and out on a snow machine, or a snowmobile as they're called in the lower 48, or by dog sled. Now, but in the springtime when the snow is melting and the road is still too muddy, you have to walk in and out because it's all slushy and we call it breakup. It's too muddy or there's still too much snow, you'd get stuck in a vehicle. So if we're going to go to town, which town's a long ways away, we have to walk out, get in the vehicle, drive wherever we're going, come back, park the vehicle by the highway, and then walk in a couple miles. Now, if we had groceries or supplies, what would happen is we would walk in, and then someone would get on a horse and ride the horse out and carry in the supplies on a horse while I watched the kids. Now, my mom's all alone. My stepfather, her husband, is away working. He did construction work, so he's not around. It's springtime. That's when you build houses. So it's just my mom and her 4 little kids. It's springtime. We're walking in. It's all slushy and muddy. Most of the snow's gone, but it's really muddy. Now, my mom's got my youngest brother, Jordan, on her back, and then Andy, the next youngest, he's able to walk, but he's a little dude, so he's pretty slow. And then David, and then myself, I'm the oldest. I'm probably 9 years old, maybe 10. And of course, I'm the biggest kid, so I'm the fastest walker. And I kind of set off. I'm a fast walker anyways, always have been. I set out ahead of everyone, and I arrive home 10 minutes before everyone. And I'm kind of waiting. Maybe I'll make a sandwich. I don't know. I don't know what I did. I'm hanging out, and now here up around the corner, I can see, here comes my mom and my little brothers. And I can tell right away my mom looks a little upset. She marches right up to me and starts poking her finger in my chest and saying some very choice words. "Don't you ever do that again." And I could tell she wasn't so much angry as she was afraid. And she had been walking in, following my footprints in the mud, and pretty soon they were joined by large footprints of a grizzly bear right over the top of my tracks. So here's my mom, walking in this long, muddy road with her 3 youngest children, and her oldest child is maybe 10 minutes ahead of her, and in between them is a grizzly bear. She doesn't know what's going to happen. She doesn't know what she's going to come around a corner and see. And there's nothing she can really do. Well, luckily nothing happened. I went back and I looked at the tracks later, and yes, they were very big. And yes, I never set out alone on my own again that I can remember. But that was my childhood. Those were the kind of things that happened quite often. We'd have grizzly bears in the front yard or the backyard. Usually the dogs would scare them away. We had like 30 sled dogs, and any animal got close to the house, they would just erupt and scare them away. Pretty cool. Let me tell you about that 4th bear story. This spring, I went to Alaska, Prince of Wales Island. Maybe you saw those videos. Lumix sent me up there to test this new camera, the G9II. They reached out a couple months before that and just asked, okay, if I was going to go somewhere and test out a camera, where would I want to go? And I made a little proposal, and I said, well, I'd like to go to Prince of Wales Island, and I want to take my buddy Charlie. And why do I want to go there? There's epic landscapes, there's all kinds of sea life, there's deer, there's wolves. Not going to see any wolves, but there's bears. And I like bears. I've always liked bears. So the time comes, Charlie and I fly out there, and I knew we were going to get a lot of deer. I knew we were going to see a lot of eagles. I knew we were going to see epic landscapes. I was really hoping we'd see a bear. I knew we'd never see any wolves. They stay in the high country, and you almost never see wolves unless you get lucky. You got to really go looking for them. You got to really know where they're at. And the terrain on this island is so rough and so dense, you'd never find them. But there's bears all over, and my buddy Charlie, who had been there before, he assured me there's a lot of bears.
The black bears here have kind of an interesting coloration. The muzzles on their noses are a lot of times coal black, and elsewhere in Alaska they have either a tan or beige or sort of almost a olivine or green short hairs around the muzzle. So the bears here are unique, and they tend to be some really big bears here too, so that's pretty exciting.
Bears were what I wanted to see more than anything. And I tell you what, right away, day one, we were seeing bear sign. Fresh bear scat, that's poop. We would see tracks on the side of the road. We were seeing it all the time. We'd be driving along these dusty dirt roads, and Charlie would slam on the brakes and jump out, and he's like, look at that. He could spot this stuff really good. He's got an eye for it. Bear tracks in the dust on the side of the highway. But as the days ticked on, we were only there for 7 days. We didn't see any bears. We kept seeing tons of sign. And I started to get disappointed, and I started to think, are we ever going to see any bears? Finally, it comes to the last day. And we wanted to do this boat tour, because I wanted to get out and maybe see some whales, see some seals, look at the coastline, get offshore a little bit and explore. And so we hooked up with this guy, Eric, and his dad was a friend of Charlie's, and they are of the Haida tribe. Now, the Haida people are the native tribe of Prince of Wales Island, and they've lived in the island for thousands of years, maybe more than 10,000 years. They have one of the only isolate languages in the United States, meaning their language isn't connected to any other language. It doesn't share any DNA with any other language. It's completely their own. They're ingenious, brilliant people who have just mastered their natural environment. You know, they were brilliant seafaring people. They actually, when Europeans started exploring America and bringing ships into southeastern Alaska, the Haida people, who were quite warlike, would attack these big European ships and take them over. They were so badass. They wore like wooden armor. They would attack other tribes. They took slaves, apparently. But they're a very rich, awesome culture. And so Charlie's friends with a couple members of the tribe, and this guy Eric, who's a pretty young guy, agreed to take us for a boat ride. We're cruising around through these little bitty islands and in and out of these seal rookeries, and we're seeing lots of sea life, tons of seals, eagles, ravens, that kind of thing. And it's getting time. We've been out there 3 or 4 hours. Now we're gonna go back to the dock, and we're gonna drive back to our Airbnb. And in the morning, at like 4 in the morning, we have to get up and drive to the ferry and take an airplane home. So our trip is over, and we're down to like the last 10 minutes. And we're heading back to the dock, and I asked Eric, can you just hug the shoreline a little bit, and maybe we'll see a bear. And we're cruising along, and Eric stopped the boat before I got too close to the shore. You know, I know he didn't want to scare the little bear. I didn't ask him to push on. I just trusted him. And I knew, even with the stabilization of the camera, and there was just too much movement, the framing, I didn't have any control over what I could shoot. I just knew I wasn't going to get a good picture. I didn't care. I just put the camera down, and I watched the bear, and he's moving along the shoreline, and he's taking his big old claws, and he's flipping over rocks, and he's picking mussels out from underneath these rocks. And now there's big rocks like this big on the shore, and this bear, if he stood next to me like on his hind legs, he wouldn't be any taller than me. He's not a big bear, but he's so powerful. He's just flipping over these rocks, and you can hear them grinding together. It was amazing. We just sat there and watched him. Finally, he just moves along the shore, and he disappears up into the trees, and Eric turns the boat, and we just cruise across the channel there back to the dock. And I was sitting in the bow of the boat, and I just had such a feeling of gratitude that the island gave us that experience in the last 5 minutes of the trip. Really, the last 5 minutes that we'd have an opportunity to see a bear, we saw one. And yeah, sure, I didn't get a good picture. I didn't care. It was an amazing gift and an amazing cap on a pretty epic trip. These things happen, folks. They don't always happen. But when they do, you got to take note. You got to be grateful. And you got to get out there into these wild places for the magic to happen. I'm grateful. It was a gift. Bears are cool. There's 4 stories about bears. We'll see you again real soon. Thanks for watching my humble little channel. Thanks for staying to the end. I appreciate all of you. We'll see you soon.